Hi, everyone. My name is Jack Kuhr. I'm the research director at Payload. Today, we have a very interesting webinar on space cybersecurity with Matt Erickson and Greg Falco, who just joined. Thank you, guys. Hi. I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation. I think it's pertinent to anyone in the space industry in any sector. There's a lot going on here and not a lot of information out to talk about it. So today we have two of the foremost experts in space cybersecurity. We have Matt Erickson from SpiderOak and Greg Falco, who's an assistant professor at Cornell. So with that, why don't we just do like very brief intros on Matt? Why don't you can start talk about SpiderOak and a little bit on your background, and then Greg, you can take it from him after that.
All right. Well, thank you and happy to be here. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day for this. Matt Erickson, VP Solutions at SpiderOak. I've been at this company for over 14 years now, and we focus primarily on how to have natively zero trust data exchange in contested and denied and degraded environments.
Awesome, Greg.
Well, yeah, thanks again for having me, Jack. Really pleasure to speak with you all. And Matt, good to see you again. So I'm Greg. I'm an assistant professor at Cornell University in our Department of Aerospace. And my work is in space security and autonomy. I direct the Aerospace Adversary Lab. And mostly we serve the DoD and intelligence community to develop new solutions and mission architectures for our national security purposes.
Awesome. Really awesome. And I think just, to give a little more background on this webinar, we're going to do a broad overview of the landscape, cybersecurity landscape, focusing on cyber threats, what is out there, who is attacking, how are they attacking, and why. So I think to start off, let's try to contextualize the landscape. So we have just over the last 10 years, we've obviously had an explosion of satellites that have been deployed. But on top of that, we've had another explosion of data that is being exchanged inter-satellites within a satellite, and just a new world of software and computer-like satellites that are just exchanging information and increasing attack surfaces for bad actors to come in. So just if you guys could just lay out that landscape, how it's changed over the last 5-10 years, and why the threat has become even more real now. And Greg, I can toss this one to you first.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the threat has been amplified mostly because of the nature of our speed to orbit and how we are engaging with a lot more commercial off-the-shelf systems for space. And as those of you on the call might know, like the space system really has a bus, and then it has a whole bunch of different subsystems that are kind of plugged in to that bus. And especially when we're talking about the vehicle, the space has, your space segment, the thing that lives in space, the satellite. You have the ground segment, which is what you control everything using with on the ground. You have your link segment, which is kind of that communications protocol. And you also have user segments, which are like your end devices, computer or the tablet or whatever that you're looking at data from. And as part of this sequence of operations, there's a lot of stuff you can just buy from anywhere, from Amazon, from eBay, from industrial control manufacturer, off the shelf, ready to go, that you can pop into your space system. And because of this, many of these components that are kind of IoT devices, or maybe slightly hardened IoT devices, they don't really have security at the front of mind. So that's part of the explosion, is just the supply chain has gotten so easy to get parts from everywhere that we just don't know how to secure them at speed.
Great. And Matt, just on how the landscape has changed over the last 5-10 years. You've been in the industry for 15 years, so you really
Well, that's to build on what Gregory said, what we have are computers. Sometimes they're in space. And we are very bad at securing computers as a species, basically. A lot of the internet was built in a high trust environment where you could pick up the phone and call the operator of the computer over there and tell them to tell their user to knock off their bad behavior. And we're just moving away from architectures built on those premises on the ground. And after starting from cybersecurity and moving into space, I've noticed that a lot of space people think space is special or different. There are things that are special or different about it, right? Like the idea of IP to orbit is a generally newer concept. Linux-based computers in orbit, again, newer concepts. But especially as you start making satellites look just like IoT widgets in orbit, the cybersecurity risks are just the same on ground as it is in space. And if you look, if you can hack something on the ground, why can't you hack it on orbit? And people never stop to think about that and the implications of that.
Yeah. So you mentioned the satellites becoming IoT widgets, and that implies this kind of interconnectivity that is probably a newish phenomenon, or is a growing phenomenon and increasing, particularly as it intertwines with our infrastructure and our day-to-day life. Can you just talk a little bit about that? How you see that unfolding?
Yeah. I mean, to like the converse, the way things have been done, as I'm sure a lot of the people here know, is previously you'd have like a giant bus, like the size of a truck or a school bus, with very fancy radios. It might be flying very fancy processors and operating systems that just nobody even knows how to talk to try to hack from the ground, right? But now that you have this whole hybrid space architecture that the Space Force is trying to wrap their arms around, we can see the explosion of commercial SATCOM and ISR services in Ukraine. And just even the fact of like your lottery tickets, whenever you go buy them, if you go buy them, that's SATCOM to whatever state's lottery agency. Same thing, a lot of ATMs. Like, why bother having to deal with a phone line? I'm just going to go use SATCOM for that. Maybe it's a little Iridium modem or something. So society is really tied in. At the same time, we are making it the cost to add capability in space is cheaper than ever these days. So we're making it cheap.
And when you talk about hacking a satellite or a space system, could be a terminal satellite in space, on the ground, just the whole network. What is it, Greg? What does that mean? What are the different types of ways to hack? Is it spoofing or jamming, or what are the different ways that a bad actor can try to get into a device?
Well,
broad question.
there's a lot of answer there. Maybe I'll start with making sure some of our audience is happy to hear. There's definitely a distinction between electronic weapons and cyber threats. In the cyber community, we often think that we often confound the two. So when we think about attacking or cyber attacks against satellites, we often cluster the idea of jamming a signal or spoofing a signal or eavesdropping on signals the same as a cyber activity, which is traditionally more affiliated or associated with like actually the computing system or the comms protocol. So one is, but it's important to note that different communities think about these areas totally differently. So if you go talk to the Intel community or DoD, they'll say, okay, well, this is an electronic weapons problem. This is not a cyber problem. So I just want to make that distinction. Jamming and spoofing are definitely electronic weapons issues. It happens very commonly in space because both from a people having fun standpoint, which is illegal, but people like to jam stuff because they sell devices on eBay for $70 or Alibaba for $20 that you can jam a whole bunch of things. You can spoof things equally with a software-defined radio. This is just about ability to make it seem like some data is being represented, even though it's not actually being represented, by overpowering the signal. So that's pretty common because an adversary can do that, a random person can do that. There's also natural interference events that happen because of our spectrum allocations and the fact that people don't actually really understand how that works sometimes. So that's like definitely one big class of hacking or annoying someone with a satellite or being irritating to a satellite. Then the other side of things is definitely more on the computing side of things, with the cyber intrusion side of things, where you're looking at breaking into a system using a known vulnerability, a code vulnerability that exists, or and that might be more likely to happen on the space vehicle segment in the satellite itself, where you're actually like, implanting malware in a vehicle that you've done lateral movement through a system. But you also have the opportunity to deploy ransomware on things like the ground segment, which is it's just a whole bunch of industrial control systems and a whole bunch of old Windows NT operating systems. So really old stuff that, have many vulnerabilities in it. But even we've demonstrated in the past year in our first paper that's described developing ransomware in space. So you can actually develop ransomware specifically for the space vehicle itself. So there's a whole bunch of different attacks. Again, I can ramble for hours about the different types of attacks, and I'll stop there though. But just to give you some clusters of categories.
Yeah. And I think that's also a good segue into talking about real world examples. And we had the last couple of years, we had the Russia Viasat threat where they what was it? I think they installed malware into Viasat modems, or something along the lines of that. But can you, Matt, are you familiar with that? The attack
Yeah.
right outside of the Ukraine war?
Yeah. And I did get exposed to some TLP Amber details on the attack, so not going to broadcast all the things, but this actually builds on for. Oh, first, sorry, everyone. What I want to do is stop and say thank you to Viasat for being so open with everyone about the attack. First off, just want to get on my soapbox. That was a very grown-up, responsible thing that Viasat did that I think helped their customers regain trust in the service, as well as help the rest of us in the industry do better. And that's something that we need to see more of, frankly. And that said, basically what happened is the attack broke through maintenance VPNs. And this is something that I was thinking of while Greg was going off all the ways to attack a space system. The other question is, why is your space system getting attacked? And this comes back to the real world examples in a minute. Like what people attack systems for a reason. Either they're basically going for a cyber joyride by just proving that they can, but typically they're doing it for some reason. Ransomware is trying to earn a buck. Russia's doing it because they're advancing their own geopolitical interests. And in this case, the weakest link, the only reason why Viasat satellites were even involved in this hack was just as a communication system. They provided convenient SATCOM to all the terminals servicing Viasat. KASAT specifically. And that's you can have a hardened satellite, but if you have an unpatched backdoor somewhere on your terrestrial system, why is the bad guy going to spend the expense of thank you, Mac. Why is the bad guy going to spend the effort on hacking your satellite to begin with if they can get in through a backdoor on ground and get their desired effects accomplished without having to actually spend as much effort?
Yeah. And that's what happened. It was a terrestrial attack, right?
Yeah, terrestrial attack against terrestrial systems using terrestrial vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
That still impacted a space system. Other ways you can think about this, like if you have your satellites up there, but your ground system is ransomware using a traditional ransomware, well, you're still not talking to your satellites until you pay. I love this thing. You're not talking to your satellites until you pay that ransom anyway.
Yeah.
And so there's just as important is the why you need to protect it, because why are they attacking you?
Yeah. And what is that why? Greg, do you want to take this one? What's how has, like, you have the Russia example where there's you have a military objective in their attacks, but in general, why why are bad actors looking to attack our space systems? Is it for money? Who are the bad actors? Is it for money? Is it for national security interests? Is it because everything is intertwined with they just want mass chaos? What's the dynamic there?
Again, lots of different reasons. One of the fun ones that I can talk about right now is, we just published this paper called Hacktivism Goes Orbital. And it was a great instance of how we saw for the first time the motive of attacks against the space system, the space ecosystem, being all a result of hacktivism, which is basically, again, just a whole bunch of people who organize around a cause, and they say, well, we don't like this company or we don't like this organization, they're doing bad stuff, and we want to take them down. So at the dawn of the Ukraine-Russia war, right after Viasat, or actually, I think maybe it started just before Viasat, but there was some very targeted attacks against Roscosmos. And there was at first, a lot of people suspected it was, people thought it was maybe Ukraine who was doing it, or people thought it was maybe the US. But after doing a really detailed open source reconnaissance exercise on this, we found out it's actually just a hacktivism group, a hacker group, that kind of is associated with kind of the anonymous folks, but a derivative of that. And the reason why they're doing it is because they were just pissed at Russia for invading Ukraine, or being bad to Ukraine. And so they took down a whole bunch of Roscosmos critical functionality systems, which was really interesting. We haven't seen that in space before. But you also see attackers, threat actors obviously nation states are interested for a couple of reasons. One is, obviously, you said military reliance on space systems. That's absolutely one. But the other is demonstrate power. And so the first public instance of attack against a space system, a satellite specifically, was the Terra Landsat 7 system back in early 2000s. And this was a demonstration of capability that China had against the US. Just they wanted to show that they can do it. And they wanted to show the US that they can, and say, hey, we're coming. We're here. So that's another reason why. Ransomware could always be one if you see an instance against a private sector company, right? Like the private sector from a commercial space standpoint, their lifeblood is access and availability of their space missions. So if you take down that availability, then they're not making money anymore because they need the data service to flow, right? So obviously, a ransomware attack against that would be bad. And we saw that play out previously as well. So there's a whole bunch of different threat actors that have really different motives for this. And it makes it harder to evaluate what the right security defenses are, because you have to think about the motive sometimes when you're developing the right defense capabilities.
Yeah.
And I just want to jump in there as well. Also to underscore a point, kind of uniquely in the space industry, if and God forbid we wind up in an all-out war, the amount that we rely on as a society in America, that we rely on as a society, that we rely on space for, that makes it a legit military target in a all-out war scenario where the goal is one opponent, make sure the other one is beaten to the point where they come to the negotiating table. And that's the closest thing we have is the merchant marine, I assume. But that's, the people are going to wind up getting shot at that never expected to get shot at. And in such a war in space, it's likely to be cyber instead of actual bullets.
It's probably impossible. It's definitely impossible to quantify it. But when you guys look at the threat actors, is it predominantly nation states, or is it these what is the highest volume of threat actors that you generally see?
From a research standpoint, we obviously look at the nation state stuff because it's really interesting. They're usually waging more APTs, these advanced persistent threats, against the satellites. And so those are just more interesting types of attacks. So that's as an academic researching national security stuff, that's who we're looking at. But that probably does not mean to say by any means that it's also perhaps the script kiddies of the world doing just random stuff. maybe Matt can speak to what he sees more in the commercial space.
Well, in the commercial space, most of what we see is the nation state stuff because most, as other research has shown, the US government is by and large the biggest buyer of space services. So basically, we go to Uncle Sam for funding, and with that, we care about what Uncle Sam cares about. And so the private sector that doesn't serve Uncle Sam as tight really hasn't woken up to the concept that they're still in the crosshairs already. So that's in terms of interest that we see as a commercial entity, that's what we're looking at as well.
But I think it's fair to say it's only a matter of time for that tide to turn. The same way that computers originally were not for the everyman or woman, and now it's in every person's pocket in the world. So, I think space is going to reach that point as well, where you're going to start seeing the interest in taking down these systems from a commercial sector or just from an everyday user standpoint, the same way we have with attacks against individuals, machines, and stuff like that.
And how has the U.S. the government responded over the last couple of years with these threats? There's a new dynamic with commercial space feeding into government space, and the government wanting secure data. What are you seeing coming from either the executive level or just regulatory groups?
I think so. The Office of the National Cyber Director and the National Space Council has been doing a great job having a road show around the country past several months. Started off at JPL in California, which I attended, and then one of my colleagues attended their closing show in Virginia. And they're definitely showing an interest in what can we actually do in a real world scenario. And they've been both interested in what's going on, both companies like SpiderOak and efforts that folks like Gregory are running. And I think the magic, no one said this on this webinar yet, so I'm going to say the magic words, secure by design. And I think people are starting to come around to the idea that you just need that. You can reinstall Windows on your PC after it gets hacked, but somebody hacks your satellite and now it's space junk. And so we're seeing a lot of attention in that regards, both from the White House all on the way down.
Yeah, if I can just build on that a little bit. Not only did they do their roadshow with ONCD and in collaboration with the National Space Council, and National Security Council also was participating in that. It was kind of like a tri-group function.
Mm-hmm.
But as of the end of December, Vice President Kamala Harris has required that they develop minimum requirements for cybersecurity by the end of the Biden administration, or at least by the end of this term of his administration. I think they're stipulating in the next 6 months or so. And there was a document out of the White House that says, this is the new tasking of this tri-agency thing, that we're going to start coming out with requirements. And so they desperately know that they need something. I don't know where they think they're going to get it from. And that's something that I've been involved in some conversations with. And the reason why is, as Matt alluded to, I share our international technical standard for space cybersecurity out of the IEEE. And it's been an effort that's been going on for roughly a year now, a little bit less, where we're working with over 20 countries and over 200 individuals who are experts in space security to develop new, and using Matt's term there, right, secure by design capability for space systems. So how do we actually understand if we are designing and developing a spacecraft from scratch, what do we need to put inside that box? And it speaks directly to the challenge of this complicated commercial off-the-shelf supply chain that I alluded to earlier in our conversation, where if we're buying stuff from people that we don't know that well, how do we build something? How do we know that it's built with anything that is right? So the standard is to provide design specifications to make sure that there is security built into these systems from scratch. And we hope that the government takes our standard development process very seriously, and we'll have this completed by the end by 2025. That's our ambition. So there's a couple of efforts that are independent from government. Again, this IEEE standard is a international operation, whereas our government's also, I think, kicking its wheels and trying to figure out how to build something in the near term as well. So, as Matt said, a lot of efforts thinking about this. We have yet to see answers. So.
Mm-hmm.
What are the legacy ways of protecting space data, space assets?
That's all you, Matt.
Well, so we can go with the an answer that's popular in the scientific communities is not to protect it. The military traditionally has leveraged highly secure certified encryption devices, which, frankly, if you have a very stovepiped mission where you might have a limited number of satellites, a limited number of ground stations, you have one contractor basically running the entire darn thing, soup to nuts, and you can iterate exactly who has access to what and where, that's fine enough. NSA certified boxes, doing NSA certified crypto, without any actual zero trust built into it, but locked down like that, that's a reasonably tractable issue if you're putting up whole tens of satellites on whole tens of contracts. Where that breaks down, though, is modern proliferated LEO, proliferated space. You're not a commercial company that's putting up satellites for $2 million isn't going to put up a $500,000 encryption box with that $2 million satellite. And furthermore, they need to be actually profitable because government by design, nature, and everything about it does not work thinking about a profit margin. They work thinking about impact to mission or impact to society with their investments. But in the private sector, we get food on our tables in a different way, and those tools, like, I can't just go and have a bespoke program and have a traditional major aerospace prime build me everything from scratch and run it for me and do all the good stuff for me with that. So that's where it breaks down into today's world, because the legacy ways of one-offs and manually scheduling security operations just don't work in the modern scale. They did in the past, but another little soapboxes that I have is simply, in the past, it was almost like having a Toyota with a machine gun on back. If your exquisite capability is in an uncontested environment, you just want to be able to get it where it needs to be as reliably and cheaply as possible. Toyota pickup. But now it's a contested environment. Detect and remediate is like noticing bullet holes in your pickup and trying to just like glue on some metal plates at the end when what you really need is an armored vehicle.
Yeah. So Matt, you work for SpiderOak, and SpiderOak is a third-party space cybersecurity firm that focuses on zero trust protocols, zero trust architecture, which I think is what you're alluding to, which would be kind of the next step of security. Can you just explain for the audience what zero trust is and why it's important in these next-gen security architectures?
Yeah, I mean, zero trust is simply the principle of, for accessing resources across the network, whether it's internal or external, start with zero and make sure that only the entities that are allowed to access resources for their jobs are granted that access. That's the really short version, and that's a new thing for a lot of industries. Greg mentioned industrial control systems, where typically you have a lot of little 8-bit logic controllers on machines connected over a network, and it's just inherently all trust. The classic military route is also all trust. You're on a classified network. Great. We trust you because you're cleared and on a classified network, which history has shown is great until you have a 19-year-old in Massachusetts who wants to impress his friends on Discord. And so technologies such as SpiderOak allow just adding extra segmentation on those secure networks, and being able to bridge across those networks as well, because there's also that matter of trust. Like, well, I trust this group of people on this secure network and this group of people on that secure network. There is an overlap, but if I want data to go from network to network, but not be exposed to the people that I don't trust, how do I do that in a normal full trust scenario?
Yeah. And Greg, do you think there are tailwinds and drivers that would encourage commercial startups to implement zero trust and a higher end security?
There are talks of tailwinds. I think that's where the sector's at right now, where no one that engages in this community, I believe, will contest that it's an important idea to have some security involved.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen any forcing function yet. While it's great to have had Viasat as a wake up to the general space community, say, hey, these things may be targeted. It did not give the same type of level of boost to the sector that I would have expected, because it wasn't seen as, I guess there's just still no driving requirements, right? And we need to go towards requirements. And when there are requirements that are stipulated in defense acquisition regulation, and when there are requirements that get instantiated as part of NASA's commercial vendor program, that say something about, like, here's what needs to be involved in the security architecture of your system, that's when we'll start seeing tailwinds. But I don't think we see that right now in a real way. And Matt might be able to talk to that more from a commercial standpoint, but I haven't seen the meaningful, meaty push yet. But I hope it's coming soon.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Requirements, like, there's no reason to expect that China is going to look through their telescope at an American satellite and see the certification for CMMC level 3 neatly embossed on the side and say, oh, shoot, guys, I can't hack this. This is certified CMMC level 3. Oh, mission over, game over, guys. Like, the current requirements are okay enough, playing catch up with legacy enterprise IT systems. But even then we see, like, every so often, a DoD email server gets popped. And it's always somewhere interesting, like SOCOM or DIA, where all that unclassed email is still of interesting importance to a nation state competitor. So the existing requirements for risk management framework, CMMC, NIST 800-171 are plenty cool. Like, I'd rather that than nothing. But we're not seeing cross-program requirements that tie together the complex architectures that America depends on in space today. We're not seeing that in the defense side yet, and I frankly don't expect to see that fully until there's an actual real incident impacting the mission. And on the commercial side, we're seeing insurance companies just give up insuring commercial space for cyber incidents because it's too intractable. So once enough investors lose their shirts on a space investment, we probably won't see it there.
So is the hesitancy from, let's say you're a space startup where you have tight budgets and you're just looking to get the satellite to space and you don't want to, you don't see the need for adding another 5% of the budget to secure that space system. Is that where is it a cost thing? Is that where the hesitancy comes from? Just in general,
Yeah.
it's yeah, okay. And maybe that the threat is like so it, it's hard to imagine what the threat is, and it's unclear if the threat will ever impact you. Maybe everyone's just thinking like, oh, it's not going to impact me, it'll impact other people. But is that kind of where that hesitancy comes from?
For startups, like yeah, imagine you're a startup and you have a 25% chance of getting hacked in the next 3 years if you don't do anything special. But you have a 100% chance of going out of business if you don't put all your investment into getting your business going.
Yeah.
3 years is a long time away, and that's only a 25% chance versus guaranteed failure
Yeah.
sooner. It's just a simple economic calculus there.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that's coming back to secure by design. Right now, security is a bolt-on. We have systems that were never designed to be secure or subjected to contested environments that we then have to go back later and figure out how to make secure, rather than making equivalent cost options that are available off the shelf that a startup can go and grab and integrate. Like the security architecture on my mobile phone is light years ahead of everything, nearly everything that I've seen in space systems, either being suggested to the government or commercial. I'm not gonna. I mean, I'm not gonna donate my own phone for science purposes yet. But why don't we even see that level of sophistication? And why don't we have that available off the shelf so a startup can buy it? When we get there, I think that's when, because people are going to want to be secure, they just don't want to pay for it compared to the other options out there. So once once folks like Greg are successful in the standards, and as SpiderOak gets more successful, obviously, but you know, having those options off the shelf, I think, can cause a lot of organic growth, even if requirements never fully catch up.
Yeah. So it sounds like a set of standards, and what was the term that you used, Greg? Design, secure by design. Those, yeah, are good ways to kind of address it. We had so
I think it's also important, though, just I want to double down
yeah,
on what you said, and also Matt alluded to, like requiring or having a budget line item for this is possibly the hardest part of everything. Because even if someone really understands the threat and they know that they have problems, or maybe they've even been attacked already, where are they going to pull that money from to be able to allocate resources in terms of people and maybe vendors or software kit to be able to do this? Like these space budgets are already maxed out.
yeah,
So I think that this is a really important point to say, like, yes, we need standards so that people can point to say, okay, yeah, I know what should be in there. We need requirements because that will then help point to and require the standards, right? But we also need someone to require the budget line item or actually opt for that line item to say, oh, well, now you have X dollars of your budget to spend on this stuff. And I know this has been one of the biggest issues for NASA and their sensors over the past decade. Is just they're just the cost center nature of this is just very damaging for how they operate, and they just can't get the money to do it.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so Greg, I know you have to hop in 10 minutes, so feel free whenever you want to go, just drop out. And for the audience, would love some Q&As if you have any questions. I know this is like such a broad topic and there's a lot of things we haven't covered yet, but would love questions for either Matt or Greg. Just pop them in the chat. I did want to talk about cost of failure with this, just to take a real bird's eye view of it. Did you guys watch the Netflix movie Leave the World Behind? You haven't seen
Never
it?
knew that it existed.
Oh, okay. So it's a big
work.
it's a big too much work. Well, it's not to give it away, not to give the premise away, but it's a kind of apocalyptic movie in a way where a nation state attacks our communication satellites, and what happens on Earth, what happens in the US if all our communication satellites go down, and I'm not giving anything away with it, but you would imagine it becomes chaos. Like it's like, society breaks down immediately when you can't do something as simple as communicate with each other. And so I would love just to talk about kind of cost of failure. I mean, this is also, you have cost of failure of the satellite, cost of failure for the satellite operator, just losing out on not being able to transmit data down. But from a societal level, how it's so intertwined with our infrastructure, and there's talks of creating a designation of it being a critical infrastructure. I'm not sure if that passed. I think that was in talks, but can you talk about the cost of failure if a satellite is attacked or hijacked even?
I mean, societally, if you knock out entire set of space capabilities, chaos, bedlam, cats and dogs lying together, like just at that end. But seriously, though, like bringing it down to where those of us have levers to actually do something about things. If somebody hijacks your satellite and dives it into the atmosphere, if you don't pay them a few Bitcoin, well, you've just lost your satellite. Those are SpaceX and others are doing a great job of making access to space cheaper, and the increased supply chain has made satellites cheaper, but that's still a very expensive hit.
Yeah, we can just put a number on it if we actually need to, though, right? So a really cheap satellite, so they go for like about 100 grand a U. So a U is like, you have 3 U's, 6 U's, 12 U's, whatever. This is a U. So, 100 grand a U. But then it's like a third of that total price to launch. So right now we're designing a 12 U CubeSat in our lab. And we learned that, roughly in parts and labor is going to cost, 1.3 or so million dollars to build. And then the launch for that is probably another, like at least $500,000 for that launch, for that capability if we can find the right deal, right? So on the low side of things, you're losing a couple $1,000,000 on what cost of failure can be. Obviously, that's not about the services that this is going to provide or about any of those broader implications, but right there, the asset and the labor and stuff itself is at least a couple $1,000,000 loss if you want, if you have something like this fail. So I think Matt gave a great answer from a more qualitative standpoint, but if someone wants a number, like you're losing a couple $1,000,000 if a single small bird goes down, and that's nothing to sneeze at necessarily.
And if Greg's satellite costs, if he earns $3 million per month of revenue off of that satellite, it's probably going to be 18 months until he can launch a new one.
Yep.
And so he's, 3 times 18 is, I'm a political science major, so somebody else do it, please. But that's a lot of that's a really hard hit that he's taking if he is anything but one of the gigantic big SATCOM operators.
Correct.
Yeah.
And even then, they probably don't want to see the tens of millions running out the door either. So,
yeah. Yeah, we have a question from the audience that's in the chat. It's on the growing opportunities in the lunar environment, how we're creating a lunar market, and there's with the CLIPS program, there's a lot of different architectures and ways of communicating, and the question is around how thoughts on cybersecurity in that environment, considering all the different all the companies proposing to operate. Yeah, just thoughts on cybersecurity past Leo, I guess, in space exploration, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a quick thought is just as we get further away, the first thing people thought is no one's going to be there. But guess what? We're already having partners and adversaries in that domain as well. So there's really no such thing as we've gotten away from the problem because we're far enough away. And the same principles will apply. Just yes, maybe slightly fewer threat actors, but they're just as powerful as we are. So it's important to note that.
I think there's also just a case of it is further away, and a lot of cybersecurity tools that we've built for IT environments kind of depend on having that always on, always connected fiber connection across the data center. Now, I mean, granted, that's still easy across the soundstage where we faked the moon landing, right? But in reality, the moon is, there's a book titled "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress." We've seen that a lot with recent issues. Here, knock on wood about intuitive machines and hoping that all goes well, but it's hard. And the extraterrestrial nature of the moon, in terms of there's no territory on the moon. When we're on the moon, it's just like in orbit around Earth, actually, where there might be an adversarial widget, or at least somebody, U.S. and a Chinese stuff operating in close proximity that need to figure out how to work together, while still there's this, general new era of mutual distrust. Just like you have orbital deconfliction needs that need to happen safely and securely in Earth orbit. If disaster strikes on the moon and you need to go knock on your neighbor's door for help, how do you do that safely and securely when everyone's all interested in the same very small spots of land on the moon?
One more thing to add to that, not to throw more buzzwords in here, but Matt alluded to further away, maybe it's less real-time communication. Not really true for the moon because we still have pretty good communication given latency issues, but a lot more autonomy. A lot more autonomy is required as we get further away. And so as more autonomy is required, there's more attack surface, more things that can go wrong. And like our lab just finished a paper on developing attacks for machine learning algorithms that live on satellites. So like this is coming, and we're going to see a lot more of it as we get further away from the Earth in terms of the autonomy, but we're also going to see attacks against the autonomy of the spacecraft.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question in the chat. And Greg, feel free to drop out.
I'm gonna head out. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you, Greg.
This is awesome. This is great. And we'll have another question, maybe one or two more questions, and then wrap up here. But one of the questions in the chat is this is from an audience member saying, as a defender with 30 years of security experience in big tech, how do I apply the knowledge to the space industry? Are there business opportunities? If so, how can I get into the market to offer secure products and services?
Well, that's a question that SpiderOak is actively working on answering for itself on one side. But honestly, a lot of the space industry, like I said, thinks that, we think that we're special just because we put extremely exquisite pieces of technology on rockets and shoot them into space. Yes, that does actually make us special. But what we put into space, it's a computer. It's a computer that communicates with the outside world. Any sort of the last 70 years of understanding computers and computer security is applicable to satellites. We've known the concept of principle of least privilege, which has turned into zero trust. This is a 40-year-old concept, and the only reason, it's I wouldn't call it malpractice explicitly that we aren't applying 40-year-old security concepts to modern systems, but I wouldn't not do that, right? Bringing those concepts in, hard lessons learned, and making sure that you patch your email server, right? You make sure you practice zero trust internally and to the space segment, and you. If you're working inside of the company, just helping your colleagues understand that it is just a computer and you need to do the same smart things on ground and in space. And that expertise learned on the ground can be applied to space without too much difficulty in so many cases.
Yeah.
We just need to, there's a lot of exquisite capabilities out there in the cyber realm that our adversaries are developing. And frankly, we need to step up our game to make sure that we force them to use those exquisite capabilities instead of going over the cheap stuff that we should have had covered to begin with.
Great. And then last question, just on the future of space threats, space cyber threats, and cybersecurity. What do you, looking ahead 5-10 years, what kind of keeps you up at night? What do you think is going to be that next, or where do you think this is going to go? And what are kind of the next generation threats that you worry about?
The next generation threats that I most honestly worry about are today's threats, which are yesterday's threats that nobody's bothered retiring yet. We're still programming in C. If you don't know what the term undefined behavior is, go read what undefined behavior is, and then now think that there's undefined behavior in every safety critical system you use. The fact that we're not developing systems with security foundationally and fundamentally, we bake too much trust into too many things. That's what I worry about for tomorrow. It's not some new whiz-bang quantum capability. It's the fact that we know better, and yet we choose to not do better.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you, Matt. We can leave it on that. This has been really, really awesome and informative. I know we have a lot of other things that we could have discussed as well, but I appreciate everyone joining. This was very fun. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Have a good one.